Australia, the great southern land, known as the sunburnt country and the land of sweeping plains. The rest of the world only knows Australia by three things. We're either flooded or on fire, everything here is trying to kill you, which hasn't been helped with the discovery of the big boy of Newcastle, and that shrimp is our national delicacy, which, you know what, I'm not going to explain that one. We are so much more than that. 60,000 years of dream timing and nearly 240 years of time dreaming has led us to today. So let's see the stories that we have to share for it. G'day everybody, welcome to a tour guide's tour of Australia. I am your host and your tour guide, Jack Clarkson, and in this podcast, I'll take you on a little tour around Australia as I interview other tour guides to find out what they do, why they do it, and their best story to tell while teaching us a bit more about Australian life and history. Now, I know what you're thinking, just another white guy with a podcast talking about history, but the concept of this one is a little bit different. Now, I am a tour guide, and I work for a few companies, mostly based in Sydney, but I'll go over those a bit later on in the episode. Before we dive into my story that will hopefully pave the way for this thing, I want to go into the concept and ideas for this. My aim is to get into the history of Australian life, from the ancient times of the land with Aboriginal Dreamtime and other tales, to the colonial arrival and to history as we know it today. I want to hear, learn and share the stories that shaped out this wonderful country from the people who are passionate about telling these stories. I want to visit the cities, the towns, the bush, the outback, far and wide, to see and feel this amazing country I call home. Now, hosting tours and being on tours is a great passion of mine where I have met some incredible people and I've heard some amazing stories from hosts and guests alike. And I know everyone has a story to tell, whether it be for themselves, a relative, or a character they've come across in their lives. This is a history podcast, not as such told by historians, but by skilled storytellers alike. With this interview-based podcast, I'll be inviting guests who host tours from various parts of the country to come on and share their passion, kind of like a little plugging session. For these people to show off their craft and to test their knowledge. Where I can, I'll be doing some research into their topics, but for the most part, I'm going in with virgin ears. Now, there will be egos at play, interesting characters, as well as laughs, tears, fear, and hope, as we dig deeper into the guts of us. Now, with all of this aside, if this is something that would interest you, then buckle up, sit back, grab a drink or a smoke, go for a walk, and turn up your radio or earphones. Chill and vibe to real people telling real stories. If you're still around, then welcome to a tour guide's tour of Australia. Alrighty, so with this interview-based podcast, I'll be asking more or less the same kind of questions until I can think of some others. These will go along the lines of more or less, who are you? What do you do? Why do you do it? What got you into this? What is your favourite story? Why is it your favourite story? Then hopefully they'll get into their stories. Then we'll talk about their best experience on a tour and reflect on why we do what we do. I guess the best place to start for these questions is to be asked right now and with me. Now, as you probably guessed by now, this is the first episode, episode 1, and I am the only guest. So I'll be interviewing myself, but don't worry, there's no role play here. It's just me getting into myself and talking about my story a bit later on. So I'll start with here. Yes, my name is Jack Clarkson. I'm a 31-year-old from a town called Bowral in the lovely Southern Highlands of New South Wales. I'm living and working in Sydney, and I am a tour guide at a few companies. I work for Dark Stories. They're a true crime company that operate in Adelaide, Brisbane, the Hunter Valley, Melbourne, Perth, and Sydney. For these guys, I mostly work in the rocks in Sydney, talking about the death, murder, and dark stories that shape Sydney life from the first settlement into the 21st century. I also host the Razor Tours in Darlinghurst that dive into the razor gangs of the 1920s and 30s. The two queens, Tilly Devine and Kate Leigh, led the empire that would rival the likes of Al Capone and Nucky Thompson. They also host in Sydney true crime cruises that sail through Sydney Harbour, talking about more death and destruction around Sydney Harbour's foreshore, as well as a travelling crime theatrical show that travels around rural areas in New South Wales that put on whodunits, murders and mystery shows. I also work for a ghost tour company called Lantern Tours that operate in Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales, and London. The ones that I host also walk through the rocks and talk about the death and the hauntings of all the parks, lookouts, pubs, and alleyways. A lot of misery despair, and resentment walks through the streets of the rocks in Sydney, and it's fascinating to me. I've got some pictures of some weird stuff that's happened on my tours, and I've had some guests who felt some strange vibes and seen some things as well. With each of these groups, I've taken anywhere from up to one person on a nice little private tour, all the way up to 40 people, massive group walking through Sydney. But the main company that I work for is Bridge Climb Sydney, where I lead anywhere of a group from another private one person, all the way up to 15 people up to the summit of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. All attached, of course, nice and safe. And I just spit facts. I dive deep into a lot of stories about history of Sydney, from the bridge itself to war history, visual landmarks. And the main story that I talk about is the deaths that occurred during the construction of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now you might be thinking, why become a tour guide? Well, I've had a fair amount of jobs in my life so far. I'm a qualified greenkeeper. I've worked construction, labouring, landscaping, irrigation, lawn and property maintenance, supermarkets. I've worked in hospitality for the better part of the last 10 years with bars, pubs and nightclubs. Before I was a tour guide, I was working in a warehouse in Barimba in Logan, Queensland, as a pickpacker, and then as a baggage handler at Brisbane Airport. The ramp job was amazing. I absolutely love to travel, and I was curious about the behind the scenes of an airport. I was living in Woodridge at the time, and although the job was great, shout out to the ramping boys of Swissport 2022, but the pay was awful and my life was just in a bit of a mess. My sister then sends me a screenshot for a job application to work at the Sydney Harbour Bridge with Bridge Climb, and I thought, you know what, stuff it, why not? Now, I've always been curious about being a tour guide, going all the way back to around 2017. My girlfriend at the time and I had Chrissy in Prague, and we did a little historical walking tour through the city, and the guide was absolutely amazing, taking us through the streets of the city, talking about history hundreds of years old. Now, I don't remember too much about the experience, except for one story, about how the citizens of the Czech Republic had turned all the signs in the streets around to slow the Nazis down from finding Prague. I think it was delaying them from reaching the city within 2 days, and ended up taking them about 2 to 3 weeks. From there, I thought this would be a pretty cool job, because I was trying to find ways how I could stay in Europe or the UK with a good skill and something that I enjoyed. Then back in Australia, once my visa finished, I worked at a pub called the Surveyor General Inn, the oldest continuously licensed inn in Australia, in a town called Berrima. A tour group on a bus would come in twice a week, bringing city slickers and foreigners away from the city out to the bush to see a bit of Australian wildlife, kangaroos, koalas, emus, then have dinner at an authentic Aussie pub, then reflect on their day. Talk about where they've come from, what they're doing on their little trips, where they're heading to next, and talk about their lives and their journeys. I thought that would be an amazing job to meet cool people and tell cool stories. Now, I've always had a fascination for the supernatural and paranormal. A ghost tour of Cardiff Castle in Wales and the Edinburgh Vaults of Scotland heightened my desire to become a tour guide for ghosts and haunted things. But then in 2020, I did a tour of Manly Quarantine Station, or Q Station, in Manly, Sydney. The guide was an old bloke, and although he did a great job, he seemed more or less seasoned, more or less kind of part of the tour itself. And I thought, mate, you're over it, I could do a better job than this. But never acted on it until about 2022, well after the pandemic. Then not long after Australia Day in 2022, myself and a couple of friends went to one of the local museums in Berrima, and I got to learning about a woman named Lucretia Dunkley. In 1842, she murdered her husband in a town called Gunning. They were executed in Berrima Jail, and I thought, this is it. This is what unlocks my desire to learn about Australian history from the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and to now. The final event that determined my decision was that myself, my sister, my old man, auntie and uncle did bridge climb, went all the way to the summit of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now, I don't remember too much about the experience, except the views were incredible and the guide that we had was absolutely charismatic. I remember one thing at the end, I asked him, mate, you enjoy your job, you absolutely love it. How do you apply for a job? He goes, look, you just go online, you apply, they're always looking. So with all of this playing on my mind, I thought, you know what, stuff it, why not? So I sent an application off to work for these guys, and this was September 2022, and I thought nothing of it until about 2 days later. I received an email to come down the following week for an interview. So I flew down from Brizzy for the interview, and by the time I got back, they'd emailed me to start within the next 2 weeks. So with everything that I just explained to you guys, spoke about just then, all of this was playing on my mind. I thought, you know what, stuff it, now's the time. So I quit my job, packed up my stuff, drove back down from Brizzy to Sydney to start the most life-changing journey I've ever had, working with Bridge Climb. That was on the 28th of September, 2022. Ever since then, it brought out a dormant desire to read again, to research, and a sense of patriotic duty has filled me, and the love of this country has been building like a bushfire on Christmas Day. So I looked around at what else I could do, and I found Dark Stories and Lantern Tours. This was to feed my knowledge about stories of Sydney and Australia. And I love dark stuff too, so it worked out well. All of this has now brought me to here. A little project behind this microphone It's been on the concept for a few months. Geez, I think it's actually feeling like a couple of years. But now it's reality. So let's see how many people actually listen to this. Even if it's just my parents, my sister, my friends, colleagues listening to this, I'll be committing to this for as long as I can to build upon everything that I know and so I can learn some more. So with all of that out of the way, it's time for me to get into my story, the one that I'm most passionate about, the deaths of the men during the construction of the Sydney Harbour Bridge.